The idea of a terminal end date to civilization has long been feared by society. And almost like clockwork, every few years there seems to be a new date to keep our eyes on, usually spurred on by some religious belief system outliers or perhaps by some mass hysteria brought on by sensationalized media coverage. So then, let's take a look at some of the more notable instances of near misses that our society may or may not have faced. For many, the end of the world has been linked to the return of Jesus and the rapture of his people. The book of Revelations lays out the final days in great detail, and, well, if it's true, it's going to be an ugly scene. You have death, famine, war, and plague, the hot-button words that are the first signs that we're nearing the end. And many church leaders have been watching out for those things since, well, the beginning. Along with that, people have tried to also use symbolism to accurately predict when death shall rain down on earth. Cheerful stuff. Now, with that in mind, you can imagine when the year 1666 was coming up quickly, a lot of people feared the worst. I mean, the year even had the number 666. Not to mention, conspiracy theorists, yes, they existed back then, began publishing articles that calculated the end and even described it in ghoulish detail. And again, this kind of makes sense. Around that time, there was a bunch of instability coming out of the English Civil War. And again, there was a year coming up with the 666 in it. Just seemed perfect. And as 1666 loomed closer and closer, tensions and fears continued to mount. And then in the spring of 1665, well, the bubonic plague was starting to eat through the good people of London. Remember, death, famine, war, and plague. The first three were consistent issues that could pop up at any time, but the plague showing up just a year before the proposed end of the world seemed a bit too coincidental. For many, it must have seemed like it was the actual end of the world. And then on September 2nd, 1666, the world did kind of seem like it was being consumed when a fire broke out in a bakery right in the heart of the city. Well, that was the Great Fire of London. It raged for 4 days, and while there's no confirmations on the number of deaths, historians believe the number was actually quite high, despite the official record only recording 8. Now, of course, Jesus didn't return, the world wasn't consumed, and, well, it didn't really end, so. Of course, religious fervor isn't the only reason for these predictions. Sometimes it just comes down to sweet, sweet greed. And that's the case with the prophet Hen of Leeds. The noted criminal and alleged witch, Mary Bateman was born in 1768. While there isn't much known about her early life, we do know that by age 20, she had to flee from York to Leeds after being part of a botched burglary. Over the next 4 years, she plied her trade as a fortune teller and wise woman. Not a great idea in those days, by the way. She married in 1792, and the following few years made a name for herself as a criminal, though not a really good one. Apparently, she was caught red-handed several times during her robberies and would just escape prison later. By 1806, Mary found her real calling when she joined a cult and came up with the great idea of predicting the end of times. Now, her story was that her hen laid several eggs with the writing, "Christ is coming," scrawled on them. This obviously captured the imagination of many, which suited Mary quite well, so she charged a penny to see the eggs. Now, before you go and scoff at the idiocy of people, the laying of the eggs was seen by a lot of people. It actually happened. Problem is, when the hen was taken away from Mary, it didn't lay any more religious predictions. It later came to light that Mary was taking the eggs, writing on them, and, well, shoving them back into the hen. It's a big oof.
It's 2 a.m., January 1st, year 2000. Power's out. It's pitch black.
Now, while this next one may not have any religious roots in its creation, many did actually consider it to be one of the harbingers of the second coming of Christ. And for some of the younger viewers, while it might sound silly, Y2K was touted as an actual coming apocalypse. This was the future war between society and computers, and the number 20 was going to be our undoing. You see, in case you need a refresher, once all the computer calendars flipped over to the year 2000, it was supposed to cause widespread outages and mayhem. But how, you might ask? Well, for that, you have to go back to the beginning of computers. You see, back in the day when computers were the size of full rooms, computer memory was super expensive. In 1975, we're talking more than $100 per kilobyte. That meant programmers had to save space anywhere they could. So the programmable date only had 2 digits, meaning when they flipped over from 99 to 00, the fear was that computers would basically believe it was the year 1900. And even in the early days of computers, it wasn't actually a secret either. You see, it was a literal trade-off for storage space, knowing full well it might mean those old computers wouldn't work past the new millennium. And as we approached it, by 1997, things were reaching a fever pitch. This is a quote from the January 1999 edition of Vanity Fair. It's an instant past midnight, January 1st, 2000. The power in some cities isn't working. Bank vaults and prison gates have swung open. Hospitals have shut down. So many countries degenerating into riots and revolution. No one will know the extent of the consequences until after they occur. The one sure thing is that the wondrous machines that govern and ease our lives won't know what to do. It was all anyone could really talk about, and governments set up committees and companies worked tirelessly to mitigate the possible damage that was coming. Money was spent hand over fist by governments and companies alike. And the biggest problem was that no one knew if any fixes would work until the clock struck 12 on January 1st, 2000. Or at least that's what they told us. You see, when the day finally came and went, well, nothing happened. So then, what actually happened? Well, if you talk to any of the computer programmers that were working back then, they'll tell you they fixed it way before it was an issue. There was nothing to worry about at any point. Remember, greed is one of the best motivators for stoking fear. And well, this was a very organized campaign. No one wanted to hear that it was a non-issue, so that fear becomes a sellable commodity. And sell it did. It kept people watching the news longer, it sold books, and it sold religion. So what about now? Are there any future dates we should be watching for? Well, yes, actually. Some more unnerving than others. Now, the closest one is 2026, and it comes from the book called The Religion of God by Riaz Ahmad Zohar Shahi. Apparently, that's when an asteroid is supposed to collide with Earth. Other than that, though, nothing really in your lifetime to worry about. Or at least we think. But, that said, there are some scientific predictions that can still keep you awake at night, don't you worry. You see, according to an article by Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom, all it would take is an asteroid 1 kilometer in diameter to basically wipe out humanity. And we can expect one of those once every 500,000 years. Not sure if he postulated the last time one of those hit, but yeah, comforting. And the Geological Society has gone on record to say that within the next million years, there will be a supervolcanic eruption large enough to ruin your weekend plans. Now, apparently, it can be an event comparable to the Toba super eruption from 75,000 years ago. Now, in case you don't want to Google that, well, it was bad. Another one would be worse. That's your TLDR, I guess. And with that cheerful ending, sleep tight.